The academic halls of the Celestial Accord's primary education complex stretched endlessly through crystalline corridors. Silver walls hummed with soft bioluminescence. Climate control systems maintained perfect atmospheric equilibrium. This was considered one of the safest educational institutions in the known galaxy. Safe, that is, until the humans arrived. The Accord had accepted Earth's first student exchange program just 3 cycles ago. The reaction across the coalition of species was unanimous. Curiosity mixed with concern. Humans were new. They came from a world of unpredictable climates, relentless predators, and crushing gravity that bent the spines of lesser beings. The Accord's Security Council had debated for months whether allowing Earth's children into their institutions was wise. But they were just children, after all. What harm could come? On this particular morning, in the 3rd quarter of the academic year, 17-year-old Sarah Chen sat in xenobiology class, taking notes on the reproductive cycles of crystalline lifeforms. Around her sat students of 100 different species. The Zethkari professor, a being of pure geometric thought housed in a floating crystalline matrix, continued his lecture with characteristic precision. Sarah had learned to ignore the stares by now. The Calarians always looked at her with a mixture of pity and fear. Their empathic sensitivity made human emotions overwhelming to experience. The Vrantok found her existence improbable, given the oxygen toxicity levels of her home world. And the Accord's own administrators simply couldn't believe such a fragile thing could survive unassisted in normal atmosphere. But Sarah wasn't thinking about the stares. She was thinking about the 3 assassination attempts in the past 2 weeks. The first had come during her meals in the common dining hall. A Hydrian assassin, hired by some distant faction of the Core Dominion, had attempted to poison the water in her section. Security had intercepted the operative before anything happened. The second had been more direct. A hired killer from the shadowed reaches had attempted to force her into an airlock. The Accord's security systems had activated, trapping the attacker in a containment field until authorities arrived. But the third one had happened 40 minutes ago in the hours before dawn, when Sarah had been entirely alone in the archive section. The message had been clear. Earth's representatives were becoming too influential. Too many of the Accord's younger members were beginning to see humans not as curiosities, but as equals, perhaps even as remarkable. Some of the galaxy's oldest powers couldn't abide such a shift in perspective. They wanted Sarah Chen gone. And as the morning classes progressed, those who had been paid to ensure her death were moving into position. Unknown to the teaching staff, 7 operatives had positioned themselves throughout the academic complex. They represented 5 different species, hired through intermediaries and shell organizations. Their orders were simple: eliminate the human student, make it look like an accident or a random act of violence. The security chief of the complex, a 3-meter-tall Zhenjur named Kulmoth, prided himself on his systems. Scanners tracked every corridor. Force fields could seal any section within milliseconds. His protocols were considered industry standard across the Accord. What Kulmoth didn't account for was that he had been checking the same false sensor feeds for the past 6 hours. Feeds introduced by an operative posing as a maintenance technician. At 14:47 station time, the first assassin moved. The Hydrian dropped from a ventilation shaft into the corridor Sarah would walk through on her way to advanced theoretical physics. Its twin blades sang through the air with crystalline efficiency. The operatives had calculated everything: the path, the timing, the moment of maximum exposure. What they hadn't calculated was Sarah Chen. She heard the sound before the attack came, the subtle hiss of pressurized servos, the minute vibration through the floor that her death world senses had been honed to detect from childhood. Training had been drilled into her since birth, not because anyone expected her to need it, but because humans simply prepared. Sarah's body moved with practiced fluidity. The first blade passed where her throat had been a fraction of a second before. She twisted, using the Hydrian's own momentum against it, and drove her elbow backward with the kind of precise, calculated force that only someone who had spent years understanding the limits of her own strength could deliver. The Hydrian struck the wall. Its companion emerged from the adjacent corridor as planned. Sarah counted them as they came, 3 operatives attempting to bracket her position. The hallway was a kill box, calculated perfectly for an ambush. She was also a human from a death world, and she had spent every day of her life in a kill box. The second assassin, a lithe Vrantok, lunged with its characteristic four-limbed strike pattern. Sarah had studied combat records from every major culture during her exchange term. Knowledge of your opponent was survival. She pivoted inside the attack, grabbed the operative's upper arm, and used its own skeletal structure, which had evolved for speed over strength, as a lever point. The Vrantok went flying into the third assassin. Alarms began to wail. Kulmoth's security center erupted into chaos as operatives began to reveal themselves throughout the complex, desperately trying to complete their contracts before law enforcement arrived. But every single one of them had been trained in the understanding that humans were fragile, that they required technology to be dangerous, that they could be overwhelmed by numbers and speed. None of them had ever fought someone from a world that was actively trying to kill them from birth. Security footage would later show what the Accords Council considered impossible. A single human girl, barely measuring 1.7 meters, holding a deliberate and efficient defensive position in a hallway designed for up to 20 humanoid combatants. She didn't attack unnecessarily. She didn't seek dominance or vengeance. She simply survived. A fourth operative attempted to flank her from behind, emerging from a side passage. Sarah heard the movement, moved with it, and guided the attacker directly into a support column with a force calculated to disable without inflicting permanent injury. "I don't want to hurt you," she said, breathing carefully, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "But I will if you come at me again." The operative hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, security arrived. 20 Accord enforcers, moving at maximum speed, apprehended the remaining operatives in the corridor and throughout the complex. Took them 90 seconds. In that time, Sarah Chen had disabled 4 combatants without receiving a single serious injury. She was sitting calmly on the floor, checking her own pulse, when Kulmoth arrived in person. The massive Jinjur commander stopped in the center of the corridor, processing what he saw. Combat-trained humans from older species described combat as an art form, a dance of discipline and calculated precision. What he was seeing here transcended that understanding. On the wall, the Hydrian unconscious with injuries consistent with impact trauma, but nothing designed to cause permanent harm. On the floor, 3 more operatives, incapacitated with technical precision. And in the center, a 17-year-old girl with a heart rate that had already dropped to below 100 BPM, brushing dust off her uniform as if she had simply won a school athletic competition. "Are you all right?" Kulmoth asked, his deep voice trembling slightly. Sarah looked up at him, and there was something in her eyes. Not arrogance, not pride, but a kind of patient understanding that seemed far older than her years. "I'm fine," she said simply. "But we should probably increase security. And maybe you should talk to whoever hired them, because I don't think they understand what they're dealing with." The interrogations that followed revealed a conspiracy that ran far deeper than anyone had expected. 7 different power factions, all working toward the same goal: the elimination of human representation in the Accord. Humans, they feared, were changing the equation. But what struck the Accord's leadership most profoundly wasn't the conspiracy itself. It was what came next. Sarah Chen, given the opportunity to leave Earth's exchange program and return home, requested to stay. "Why?" the Accord's chancellor asked her directly, in a formal session attended by representatives from 100 worlds. "You were nearly killed, multiple times. Your security now requires constant attention. What possible benefit could Earth gain from continued participation in this exchange?" Sarah stood, small and almost impossibly young compared to the towering aliens surrounding her. "Because," she said, "if we leave every time someone tries to hurt us, we never belong anywhere. And Earth is tired of being alone in the galaxy. We want to be part of something greater, not conquered by it, not feared because of it, but part of it." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Where I come from, danger is normal. Predators hunt us. Storms can destroy everything we build. Our own biology fights against us constantly. We've learned that you don't survive by being the strongest or the fastest. You survive by being resilient, by learning, by caring for each other even when it would be easier not to. The human extended her hand in the gesture of peace and trust that had become familiar to the Accord's younger members. That's what humans do. We survive, not alone but together. And we do it not because we're special, but because we understand that being alive means taking care of what you love, no matter the cost. The Chancellor, a being of pure consciousness who had lived for 17,000 years, felt something shift in the quantum foam of his existence. The humans weren't remarkable because they were warriors or intellectuals or survivors. They were remarkable because despite their fragility, despite their limitations, despite the crushing probability of their own extinction, they chose to keep trying, chose to connect, chose to care. The Accord's Council made its decision that very cycle. Earth was not only accepted as a full member of the Celestial Accord, but given representation on the primary council. Not through military strength or technological superiority, but through a recommendation that came not from politicians or security chiefs, but from the students themselves. The Calarians, who had initially viewed humans with pity, began to study human literature and art, finding in them an emotional depth that resonated with their own empathic nature. The Vrantok, impressed by human tactical thinking, began collaborating with Earth's military academies. And the Jinjur, the warrior caste of the Accord, found themselves humbled. In their culture, strength was the highest virtue. But Sarah Chen had taught them that true strength wasn't about dominance. It was about knowing when not to break something precious. 3 years later, Sarah Chen graduated from the Celestial Accords Academy with honors in xenopsychology and conflict resolution. She was 20 years old, and she had fundamentally changed how the galaxy perceived her species. But she never considered it an achievement. To Sarah, it was simply being human. As she left the academy, walking toward a future that would help bridge the vast gulfs between the worlds, the Chancellor stood watching. The being of pure consciousness contemplated the small human woman, silhouetted against the bioluminescent glow of the Accord's halls. "We thought we knew what strength was," he said to his advisors. "We measured it in weapons, in intellect, in lifespan. But humans, they measure it in something entirely different. They measure it in the willingness to stand alone if necessary, but the desire never to stand alone if a choice exists." The advisors were silent. "We can create weapons," the Chancellor continued. "We can build wonders of technology. We can manipulate the very fabric of spacetime itself. But we cannot create what makes humans extraordinary. Because what makes them extraordinary is that they choose it. Every single day, despite their fragility, they choose to be better than they need to be." He paused, and for the first time in thousands of years, the ancient consciousness experienced something close to wonder. And for the first time, the galaxy understood the truth that humans had always known, that might did not define worth. Intelligence did not define wisdom. Lifespan did not define legacy. What mattered was the willingness to care, the courage to try, the grace to choose connection over conquest. And in that simple understanding, the whole universe changed. If the story of human courage and compassion moved you, if you felt that flutter of pride in what humanity can be when faced with impossible odds, then subscribe for more human stories from the stars. Stories of the moments when the galaxy learned what it meant to stand alongside the children of Earth. Because we are more than our strength. We are human, and that is enough.